Steve Cooper, Rank Success, and I'm just covering another book that I think you might find helpful as a pick up and put down resource. And today's book is called The Rules of People by Richard Templar. I have done another previous video on The Rules of Management by Richard Templar, which is really good, a really good resource for you if you're looking to kind of start thinking about developing yourself for promotion, or to just start triggering and supporting your thinking around that area. The Rules of People today, the reason I've chosen this one is because I generally like the books in his series anyway, because they pick up and put them down. There's a rule on each page, so it's the kind of thing you can read if you're busy in between shifts, if you're commuting, so I quite like that. But the reason I've chosen the Rules of People is because as a leader, as a manager, as a supervisor, and particularly as a new supervisor, it's hard enough doing the job anyway, but some of the key challenges, some of the challenges in your career are going to be people based. So the more you can learn about people, there's nothing new under the sun in terms of human behaviour. So we shouldn't ever be surprised when people behave or in certain ways or do things in certain ways. But a book like this can really just help you kind of put some of those things into perspective, and also to open up your thinking, to be more inclusive, and to understand that your way is not always the best way. So this is a great book for you, because as a sergeant, you're going to be managing a team. You're running around in the spotlight all the time right now, probably trying to get noticed as an individual officer. And when you're successful, the spotlight is turned off, and it's turned straight back on to a group of people, your team, and you're then judged on the performance of a team. So understanding a little bit about how people tick, how they work, is not only interesting and helpful for you and useful, it's actually a lifelong discovery, because as I said, there's nothing new under the sun. So picking up a little book full of tips that someone's taken the time and trouble to write down may just help you on your journey. So I could choose any of these, they're all really good, but Rule 2 is one that I've picked out in there. No one has to be like you. And that's a mindset for you to get used to. No one has to be like you. There's an example given in here of an individual that drove his manager mad, because everything on the individual's desk had to be organised, methodical, and disciplined in a certain way. And it drove them mad. And the guy says, if I'm completely honest, for a long time I looked down on my colleague because he couldn't generate ideas and do other things like I could. He just wasn't that kind of person, and the desk was the most obvious indicator of who he was. But I realised over time that individual had a particular skill set. When everybody who couldn't find their emails started coming to him saying, where's that email? Because he kept all these in colour-coded order, everything was filed away. And the key messages were always, almost all of us are guilty at times of thinking that our way is best. And sometimes, unless you're alerted to that, you labour under that apprehension all the way through your career. In relation to this particular example, I finally accepted that my colleague was never going to have a messy desk like mine, and that was actually okay. It was much easier then to like him and appreciate him. And the key message is, just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's wrong. And I think that's an important observation. And today particularly, I remember people with dyslexia when I was an officer, with severe dyslexia, being the butt of humour, the source of jokes, their work being a source of amusement. Not very often, not too far, but now I understand that actually we know far more about those issues. And if you look at what's happening in policing, there's far more acceptance and inclusivity around things like neurodiversity, and it's okay. Dyslexia, dyspraxia, obsessive compulsive disorders, you can live with them, you can work with them, you can actually turn them into strengths that they are, if there's just the acceptance that you recognise no one has to be like you, and that's okay, and everyone's got a particular set of skills. Now on my computer, my desktop's generally a mess on my computer desktop, full of images and old documents, because I'm not that way. I'm not wired up to be disciplined and focused in relation to keeping information like that. A colleague of mine who helps me out from time to time with work that I do looks at my desktop and is in shock and horror, and he looks at it and goes, right, I've got to click the button and make it all appear in file order, and I can then tidy those file lines up. So I rely upon the support from that individual from time to time, and I understand very much that he's not like me in that way, and that's okay. So there's a really good kind of human observation thing around there that I quite enjoyed reading. Excuse me, I quite enjoyed reading, and as I say, that's why I'm recommending the book to you. Rule 16: confrontation can be scary, and it can be scary. There's almost never any need for outright confrontation, and this is amongst teams, amongst colleagues, amongst friends, amongst working people you work with. In fact, never at all is it acceptable, as long as both of you are behaving like adults. So there's the challenge, there's the state we all want to operate in. The trouble is that some people are so anxious about raising the things that they're unhappy about that they'd rather leave a problem unresolved, because it's a safe option, isn't it? So this really does trigger your thinking around, confrontation. It doesn't happen very often, but it very much links to the CVF competency of we are emotionally aware, and the requirement and the responsibility and the need for certainly team leaders, managers, supervisors, and at different ranks to have a healthy degree of emotional intelligence in order to be able to deal with these issues, to avoid confrontation wherever and whenever possible, and it does happen from time to time, and to do that through creating an environment of respect at all times, which is a key strength for leaders and managers and supervisors. And preferably that environment where people can innovate and thrive and excel and enjoy coming to work. So just coming in at that argument, that observation about on the point of confrontation as a human need to understand. So that's one of the things that I found quite interesting as a topic, confrontation, because you open it up, you think, does that happen? Yes, it does. It happens far more often than we think. But in terms of being a leader and a manager and a supervisor, it's your job to recognise that should be as least often as possible, and to understand the motivations and the reasons behind that, how that might arise. And rule 50 is just the third one I wanted to cover very quickly. Loyalty runs both ways. The key thing to understand is that people don't choose to be loyal to you. Either they feel it or they don't. And I find that quite interesting because, the CVF is full of competencies and there's 4 explicit values, and there are lots of other values, but you never see loyalty amongst them. And I wonder why that is. You can answer it in your own way if you want to. I just always wonder why loyalty is not there. Now, blind loyalty can be abused, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, the kind of stuff where you look at the film Spartacus. I always think of Spartacus with Kirk Douglas in it, where the Roman commander Laurence Olivier says, give up the individual called Spartacus, and you can all have your lives. I will spare your lives. And you may well know it. I'll be really surprised if you haven't seen it, because it's been on so many times. And Kirk Douglas goes to stand up, and Tony Curtis stands up, and all his men stand up before he can and say, I'm Spartacus, I'm Spartacus, I'm Spartacus. And then you see a little tear run down Kirk Douglas's face. That's loyalty, that moment in that film. For me, that's the way I think about it. Now, clearly it's a value that cuts across teams, and it does exist, it is there, and if you treat people right, they will be loyal to you within certain boundaries, and that comes back to things like showing them that you care about them individually, which is highlighted in this book, very relevant to sergeants getting to know the strengths and the skills of the individuals, primary and secondary skills, their background, their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations that they want to achieve in the job. So if you show that you care about people individually, it's important to them. And being appreciative when people do stuff for you, when people do work or do something for you. So saying thank you, but not just saying thank you, telling them why you find it, that you appreciate it, tell them why. And using praise and recognition, they cost you nothing. They're powerful human motivators. So doing some work around the rules of people and some thinking and reflection is probably very helpful to you. And I'll be back with another book review shortly. Until then, take care.